concert hall shined with bright lights, expensive decorations, and a kind of excitement that made people smile without even realizing it. It was the kind of night people planned weeks in advance, choosing outfits, doing makeup, and imagining how they would tell their friends about it later. A famous singer was performing, someone whose songs played on radios, social media, and huge stages across the world. For many fans, being in the same room with him felt unreal, almost like a dream. The crowd began arriving early, dressed beautifully, greeting each other with laughter and loud voices. They ordered drinks, took photos, and talked about how amazing the night would be. Some fans had traveled from other cities just to see him live. They weren't just coming to listen, they were coming to experience something unforgettable. Inside the hall, the stage was set perfectly. Huge speakers stood on each side, shining instruments waited to be played, and a giant screen behind the stage displayed the singer's photos and clips. Crew members rushed around checking microphones, wires, lights, and cameras. Everything needed to be flawless. A show like this wasn't just entertainment, it was business, reputation, and image all tied together. The famous singer, whose name everyone knew, prepared backstage with his team. He looked confident, with perfect hair, stylish clothing, and the calm smile of someone who knew he was important. He didn't have to try to impress people anymore, his fame already did that. People admired him, envied him, and followed everything he did. He was used to attention, applause, and being treated like royalty. But the audience didn't see the stress behind the show. They didn't see the pressure of staying famous, the fear of being replaced, or the exhaustion from constant expectations. All they saw was a star shining brightly, untouchable, extraordinary. Meanwhile, among the crowd, moving quietly and unnoticed, was Nora. She wasn't a fan, and she wasn't dressed like the others. She worked at the venue, wearing a simple uniform and carrying a tray with drinks. Her hair was tied back, her clothes plain, and her face soft and gentle. She didn't belong to the glamorous side of the event, she belonged to the working side. Nora had been working there for months, cleaning tables, serving guests, and helping backstage. She didn't hate her job, but she didn't love it either. It was just something she did to survive. She didn't expect excitement, recognition, or admiration. She expected long hours, aching feet, and being invisible to people who looked right through her. As Nora moved between tables, she overheard conversations. People talked about their careers, expensive holidays, and designer clothes. They laughed loudly at jokes she didn't understand. She wasn't jealous. She was used to being outside of other people's worlds. The only thing she loved, quietly and secretly, was music. Not pop music, not loud party songs, but soft songs that carried feelings. She used to sing when she was younger, not for fame, not for applause, but because it made her feel alive. But life got busy, money got tight, and dreams had to wait. She walked past the stage, watching the musicians warm up. They didn't notice her, she wasn't part of their world. She wished for a moment that she could stand there with them just once, even if nobody knew her name. But reality pulled her back as a voice called her name, asking for help with the dishes. Backstage, the famous singer took a deep breath. His manager went over the plan: opening act, introduction, jokes, crowd interaction, big finale. The singer nodded, but he didn't really listen. He had done this 100 times. He knew what to do, what to say, how to move, how to smile. He knew how to make the audience scream, cry, and record videos they would replay forever. He walked onto the stage with confidence, and the room exploded with cheers. People stood up, clapped, screamed his name, phones flashed everywhere. The energy was electric. He raised his arms with a practiced smile, letting the admiration wash over him. He loved this feeling, being adored, being praised, being the center of everything. Nora watched from the side, hidden behind a curtain. She saw the crowd, the excitement, the star. She saw a world she would never have access to. But she didn't resent it, she accepted her place quietly. The performance began with loud music, powerful vocals, and choreographed movements. The audience danced, clapped, and sang along. It was loud, dynamic, and thrilling. Camera operators moved quickly, capturing every angle for social media and promotional clips. Everything looked perfect. But beneath the perfection, the singer felt something missing. He wasn't inspired anymore. He was performing routine motions, not passion. Fame had become a job, not a joy. His smile was real, but it was tiring. He wasn't singing to express himself, he was singing because people expected him to. During a break between songs, he took a sip of water and looked around the room. His eyes scanned the crowd, wealthy guests, obsessed fans, industry people, all impressed, all excited, but all predictable. Then he noticed something different. A simple woman standing quietly at the edge of the stage, holding a tray, watching with calm eyes. She wasn't cheering. She wasn't recording, she wasn't starstruck, she looked ordinary. And somehow that made her interesting. The famous singer, bored with routines, suddenly had an idea, not a kind one, not a thoughtful one, but an idea that would entertain him and maybe entertain the audience too. He pointed toward Nora. And the night began to change. The music paused for a short break, and the famous singer walked toward the edge of the stage, drinking water and wiping sweat from his forehead. The crowd was still buzzing with excitement, yelling his name, asking for photos, cheering for more songs. He smiled because he had to, not because he felt genuine joy. Fame was loud, exhausting, and sometimes empty. Lights flickered around the room as waiters hurried between tables, refilling drinks and collecting empty glasses. Guests talked loudly, trying to impress each other with stories of expensive things, houses, cars, trips, success. There was a competitive happiness in the air, as if everyone wanted to prove they were living the perfect life. Near the front, a group of wealthy fans made a joke about music. One of them said, "These days anyone can sing. Real talent doesn't exist anymore." Another replied, "Yeah, even my housekeeper thinks she can sing in the shower." They all laughed loudly, not caring who heard. The singer turned to them amused. He liked attention, and he liked being the center of every conversation. He flicked his hair dramatically and said, "Talent takes work. Not everyone can be me." The crowd laughed, mostly because they agreed. He glanced around the room, searching for something or someone to keep the attention on him. His eyes landed on Nora, who stood near a table quietly refilling glasses. She didn't stand out. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She was simple, invisible, just doing her job. The singer pointed at her suddenly. "Hey you," he shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Come here." Nora froze, unsure if she heard correctly. She looked around, hoping he meant someone else, but he pointed again, more aggressively this time. "You, in the uniform, come on." The audience turned their heads toward her. Some smiled, amused, others raised eyebrows, curious. Nora's heart raced. She didn't like attention, especially not the kind that felt forced. But she couldn't refuse. It was her workplace, and he was the star of the night. She walked slowly toward the stage, her hands shaking slightly, afraid she might drop the glasses she carried. When she reached the edge, she set the tray down carefully and wiped her palms on her apron without realizing it. The singer smiled, a confident, prideful smile. "Everyone," he said loudly, "let's see if this lady can sing." Laughter erupted instantly, loud, careless laughter. People clapped, some cheered, others whistled. They weren't cheering for talent. They were cheering for entertainment at someone else's expense. Nora's face turned red. She shook her head politely. "I don't sing," she said quietly, voice barely audible. The singer leaned closer to the microphone and repeated loudly, "She says she doesn't sing." The crowd laughed louder. He wasn't interested in her answer. He was interested in reaction. "Come on," he said, his tone teasing. "We're all friends here, just one little solo, show us what you've got." Nora shook her head again. She wasn't afraid of singing, she had sung before, but she was afraid of being laughed at. She didn't want to be the joke of the night. A woman in the audience shouted, "Don't be shy, it's just fun." Another man added, "Even if you're terrible, we'll clap." Their idea of fun was humiliation disguised as entertainment. The singer, sensing hesitation, decided to push harder. He took a few dramatic steps forward, reached down, and took Nora's hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. He practically dragged her onto the stage. The crowd cheered and clapped as she stumbled slightly, trying not to fall. She looked like a frightened animal trapped under bright lights. Once she stood beside him, he held the microphone toward her. "Tell everyone your names," he commanded. Her voice trembled. "Nora." The crowd repeated her name, mocking or exaggerating it. "Nora," one man shouted in a high-pitched voice. People laughed again. The singer smirked. "Nora will now sing a solo for us. If she impresses us, maybe I'll give her a job on tour." He didn't mean it. He said it because it sounded entertaining. Nora stared at the floor. She didn't know what to do. Saying no felt impossible. Saying yes felt terrifying. She whispered, "I don't know what to sing." A voice from the audience yelled, "Anything, sing your ABCs." Laughter, more laughter, cheap laughter. The famous singer leaned toward her ear and whispered something she would never forget. "Don't ruin the mood, just sing something, don't embarrass me." His words weren't kind, they weren't supportive, they were selfish, demanding, and careless. He wasn't giving her an opportunity, he was using her to fill a moment of boredom. He stepped back and shouted into the microphone, "Let's give Nora some encouragement." The audience clapped loudly again, a noisy mixture of excitement and expectation. But their applause didn't feel supportive. It felt like pressure, like a wall closing in. Nora looked around the room, eyes wide, throat tight. She wasn't used to being seen, she wasn't used to being judged. And now hundreds of eyes stared at her, waiting for her to act. She remembered her mother's voice, soft, gentle, telling her to sing because it made her happy, not because people demanded it. Her eyes filled with tears, not from sadness but from fear and memory. She didn't want to sing for attention. She didn't want to sing for the crowd. She didn't want to sing for the famous singer's ego. But something inside her told her that staying silent would hurt more than trying. She took a shaky breath. The singer smiled selfishly, believing he had created a funny moment. He had no idea what he was about to witness. Nora stood on the stage, blinking under the bright lights that made her feel exposed, too visible, too vulnerable. She wasn't wearing anything special, just a worn uniform, black shoes, and an apron. Her simple appearance made her stand out even more, because everyone else in the room looked polished, stylish, confident. She didn't belong on that stage, and everyone knew it. The famous singer, meanwhile, stood beside her with a playful smile, completely relaxed, as if he was sure this moment would be entertaining. He wasn't worried about embarrassment because he assumed she would be the one embarrassed, not him. The audience leaned forward in their seats, not with curiosity but with amusement. They weren't expecting a performance, they were expecting a disaster. People held up their phones, ready to record. They wanted something funny, something cringeworthy, something they could post online later with a mocking caption. A man near the front whispered loudly to his friends, "This is going to be terrible." His friends laughed, leaning in for a better view. Another woman, swirling her drink, said, "Why would she agree to this? She's going to regret it." But nobody thought about how Nora felt, standing frozen, forced into spotlight by someone with too much power and too little empathy. Everyone assumed she would fail because she looked ordinary. She didn't look like a singer. She didn't have dramatic makeup, expensive clothes, or a confident posture. She looked like a worker, someone invisible, someone easily dismissed. Someone from the back shouted, "Come on, get it over with." The crowd chuckled, impatient. The famous singer raised his eyebrows at Nora, acting playful but with a hint of pressure. "Ready when you are," he said into the microphone. Those 4 words sounded friendly, but Nora heard something else. "Don't embarrass me." Her throat felt tight. Her stomach churned. She wished she could disappear, fade into darkness, hide somewhere no one could see her. But she couldn't. She had been dragged into this moment, and all she could do was face it or walk away. Walking away would make the crowd laugh harder. Staying meant risking humiliation. Some people in the audience leaned back, crossing their arms, confident in their predictions. They believed that talent belonged to those who looked talented. And Nora didn't look the part. One teenager whispered to his friend, "She's probably going to scream sing like those bad talent show auditions." His friend snorted, "Better record just in case." Phones were pointed at her like weapons, ready to capture failure. But not everyone was cruel. In a quiet corner, an older couple watched with worried expressions. The woman frowned, whispering, "This doesn't feel right." She looked scared. The man nodded, sighing, "Fear isn't entertainment." Near the bar, a young girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and asked, "Why are they making her sing if she doesn't want to?" The mother didn't have an answer. She just stroked her daughter's hair and said, "Sometimes people forget to be kind." But kindness was rare in that moment. The famous singer, enjoying the attention, stepped back and sat casually on a high stool, crossing his legs like a judge on a talent show. He gestured to the pianist, signaling him to start playing something simple and soft. A gentle melody filled the room. It was a familiar tune, something easy to follow, but even a simple song could reveal skill or lack of it. The audience grew quiet, but it wasn't respectful silence. It was hungry silence, eager to witness a mistake. The singer tilted his head, pretending to be encouraging, but his eyes sparkled with mischief. He didn't believe she could surprise him. He didn't believe she had anything special to offer. In his mind, this was entertainment, a harmless joke, a funny memory, something he could talk about later. He had no idea his arrogance was being watched closely by people who were slowly losing respect for him. Nora took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. Her mind was full of noise, doubt, fear, memories of her mother singing lullabies in a tiny kitchen, memories of singing at night when no one could hear. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed silent. People shifted impatiently. Someone muttered, "She doesn't even know how to start." Another replied, "I told you she's going to freeze." But Nora wasn't frozen because she didn't know how to sing. She was frozen because she knew this moment could change everything, not because of attention, but because of shame. When you sing in your room, there is no pressure, no judgment, no crowd waiting for you to fail. On a stage with hundreds of eyes staring, failure feels like a wound that takes years to heal. One wrong note, one shaky breath, one crack, and she would be remembered not as Nora, the hardworking woman, but as the joke of the night. She looked out at the audience, and for the first time she noticed their faces, amused, curious, expectant. Nobody believed in her. Nobody wanted to believe in her. And strange as it was, that realization made the fear fade slightly. Because if nobody expected anything good, she didn't have anything to lose. She swallowed hard, her voice shaking inside her chest, waiting to be born. The pianist looked up at her with soft eyes, silently asking, "Are you ready?" She nodded. Not confidently, but bravely. The crowd leaned forward again, hungry for entertainment. They weren't waiting for beauty. They were waiting for failure. They thought the next sound they heard would be embarrassing, awkward, painful. But they didn't know Nora. They didn't know her voice. They didn't know that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest talent. The room waited, and Nora opened her mouth to sing. Nora stood under the lights with her mouth slightly open, but no sound came out yet. Her heart was beating so loudly she could feel it in her ears. Her hands shook, her knees felt weak, and she wondered if she might faint. For a moment, she thought about stepping back, shaking her head and walking off the stage, no matter how much people laughed. At least then she could escape this horrible pressure. But then something very soft, almost invisible, happened inside her. A memory came back. It wasn't a big, dramatic memory. It was simple. She remembered standing in a tiny kitchen as a child, watching her mother cook. Her mother would sing quietly while stirring soup or washing dishes. She didn't have a perfect voice and she didn't care. She sang because it made the house feel warm. She sang because it made their hard life feel less heavy. She sang because music helped her breathe. And sometimes Nora would sing with her. Her mother would smile and say, "Don't be afraid of your voice, it belongs to you, no one can take it away." But many things had been taken away over the years. Her mother, their home, her dreams, all of it disappeared slowly. Singing became something private, fragile, hidden, something she only did when she was alone, when nobody could make fun of her. And now, here she was, being forced to share the most sensitive part of herself in the most humiliating situation possible. Her mind screamed, "You can't do this." But her heart whispered, "Sing because you need to, not because they asked you to." She looked at the audience, not at their faces, but at their silhouettes. She didn't see individual people anymore. She saw shadows, shapes, blurs. That made it less frightening, because you can't fear shadows the same way you fear eyes. The pianist began softly, giving her a space to join. He wasn't pushing her. He was waiting patiently, gently, like someone offering a hand instead of demanding performance. The famous singer smirked, leaning back casually, expecting her to fail publicly. In his mind, this whole moment was harmless fun, a joke, a small story, something to talk about later. He was thinking about entertainment, not emotion. He didn't know he was pushing someone to face a battle she didn't ask for. Nora took another deep breath, deeper than before. Her lungs filled with air and her body began to steady. She closed her eyes. The lights disappeared, the crowd disappeared, the stage disappeared. All that remained was the memory of singing in a tiny kitchen. She sang the first note. It was small, soft, and shaky, like a child taking their first step. Some people in the audience smiled, thinking it sounded weak. A few whispered, "Here we go," ready to record a terrible performance. But Nora didn't stop. She sang the next note slightly stronger, and then another, and another. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was rich, warm, emotional, full of something real. She wasn't trying to sound impressive. She wasn't copying anyone. She was singing with her real voice, the one she hid away for years. The audience's laughter faded into confusion. The famous singer who expected embarrassment sat up straight, eyes narrowing. He didn't smile anymore. He didn't look relaxed anymore. He wasn't expecting this. Nora's voice grew steadier with every breath. Her fear didn't disappear completely. It transformed. It became energy, power, emotion. Her voice carried that transformation in every word. The song she sang wasn't loud or popular. It wasn't a hit song with perfect high notes. It was a simple melody filled with something deeper than skill, honesty. And honesty, when expressed through music, becomes a force nobody can ignore. Some audience members leaned forward stunned. Others stopped recording, embarrassed by what they expected to witness. People who were ready to laugh now sat frozen, captivated. Nora didn't look confident. She didn't smile. She didn't perform like someone who wanted applause. She sang like someone who needed to breathe, who needed to feel alive. For a moment, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a joke. She wasn't invisible. She was a person, standing alone, holding onto a piece of herself that life hadn't managed to destroy. The famous singer felt something unfamiliar, unease. He wasn't embarrassed yet, but he was uncomfortable. His joke had turned into something powerful, and he wasn't in control anymore. Nora's voice rose gently, not dramatically, but beautifully. Clear, emotional, sincere. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. And that made it unforgettable. A woman in the audience wiped a tear from her eye, shocked by her own reaction. A man who earlier mocked Nora crossed his arms, unable to meet her gaze. The teenagers looked at each other, quietly failing to hide their embarrassment. Not because Nora was bad, but because they had misjudged her so completely. Nora's voice reached a quiet peak, not dramatic but heartbreaking, and then slowly, softly, she ended the verse. Silence followed, a deep, heavy silence, not because she failed, but because she didn't sing to impress. She sang to survive, and in doing so she broke every expectation in the room. Nora stood still after finishing the first soft line, unsure if she should continue or stop. The silence in the room felt strange, not aggressive, not mocking, just stunned. She didn't understand that silence often follows beauty. She thought maybe people didn't know how to react, or maybe they were waiting for something more. So she kept singing. Her voice didn't suddenly turn loud and powerful, like in movies where shy singers explode into dramatic high notes. Instead, it grew slowly, naturally, like a plant reaching for sunlight. The tremble faded from her tone, replaced by something steady and sincere. The softness remained, but it had strength behind it, a quiet strength that made people listen without meaning to. She sang with her eyes closed, making the entire room disappear. For her, this wasn't a performance. It was a memory, a prayer, a piece of her life that she didn't know she had hidden so deeply. She let the words flow from her, not perfectly but truthfully. People in the audience who had been preparing to laugh now felt something unexpected in their chests. It wasn't admiration yet, it was curiosity, confusion. They weren't sure how this ordinary woman, who looked like she might not even enjoy speaking out loud, could produce something so emotional. A few people leaned forward unconsciously, elbows on the table, eyes wide. The melody wasn't complicated, but it was beautiful. It carried sadness and hope and longing. It sounded like someone trying to hold on to something fragile before it slipped away. A sound made by someone who had lost things, not material things, but people, dreams, time. One woman in the audience whispered, "She's good." But even that small sentence felt too loud for the moment. The famous singer, sitting casually a few minutes earlier, now sat upright, elbows on his knees, watching her closely. His face, usually full of pride and confidence, now showed a rare expression, surprise. He didn't know whether to be impressed or annoyed. He had expected a disaster, not talent. He had not prepared for humility. The pianist, who had been playing softly, began to support her more confidently, adding delicate flourishes, adjusting the tempo, giving her room to breathe and shine. He wasn't just playing background music anymore, he was collaborating. He recognized her ability even if she didn't recognize it herself. Nora reached a part of the song where the note climbed higher. She didn't force it. She didn't push, she let it glide gently upward like someone lifting a fragile object with careful hands. The note was clear, honest, slightly broken, and heartbreakingly beautiful. A woman in the middle of the room covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide the shock on her face. She had come to the show for glamour, lights, and entertainment. She didn't expect to feel anything deep. She didn't expect to be moved. A group of teenagers who earlier laughed loudly and pointed phones at Nora slowly lowered their screens. There was nothing funny to record anymore. What they were witnessing felt too real to become a joke. One of them whispered, "She doesn't even look like she's trying." And she was. That was the strange, powerful part. Nora wasn't performing for applause. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't singing to show off. She was singing because the song lived inside her, and suddenly in this unlikely moment she found the courage to let it out. She sang the chorus with a soft ache in her voice, and the entire room held its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody whispered. Even the staff, waiters, bartenders, cleaners, paused what they were doing, drawn to the sound instinctively. Music has a strange way of revealing the truth about people, both the one who sings and the one who listens. In those few minutes, the room wasn't filled with wealthy guests or fans of a superstar. It was filled with human beings, vulnerable, emotional, flawed, hopeful. People weren't thinking about their clothes or their careers or their problems. They were thinking about the person they once were, the child who dreamed, the teenager who believed in something, the adult who lost parts of themselves along the way. Nora sang the final lines more quietly than the beginning, as if closing a story with gentle hands. The last note faded into the air, delicate and long, trembling not with fear anymore but with emotion, and then silence. A deep, heavy silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full. The famous singer opened his mouth but didn't speak. He couldn't find a joke, he couldn't find a clever line. His pride had no script for moments like this. People didn't clap immediately, they didn't cheer, they didn't shout. People didn't clap immediately, they didn't cheer, they didn't shout. They just stared, not at her clothes or her face but at her. For the first time in a very long time they saw her, not as a waitress, not as a simple woman, not as a background character in their night, but as someone who carried something astonishing inside her. Someone who didn't need fame to be extraordinary, someone they had underestimated and were now humbled by. Someone who, with nothing more than a fragile voice, had changed the room completely, and she didn't even know it yet. Nora stood quietly on the stage, breathing softly, trying to understand what she had just done. She felt dizzy, not because she sang badly, but because she had allowed herself to be seen in a way she hadn't in years. She didn't know whether to smile or apologize or run away. She just stood there, frozen, unsure what came next. But the audience knew. They knew they had witnessed something special, something they hadn't expected, something that shifted the energy in the room. The silence that followed her song wasn't empty, it was full of stunned thoughts. People didn't clap immediately because they needed a moment to process what they felt. The first feeling that spread across the room was shock. Not loud, dramatic shock, but quiet disbelief. How could this simple woman sing like that? Where did she learn? Why is she working here instead of performing on stage? These questions, whispered between tables, carried confusion, guilt, and admiration all mixed together. Many of the guests had walked into the venue believing they could predict people based on their appearance. They judged Nora because she looked ordinary, because she served tables, because she wasn't dressed in glamour. They thought she was small, silent, unimportant, but her voice showed them they were wrong. And being proven wrong, especially in public, can feel uncomfortable. One man who had laughed earlier rubbed his forehead awkwardly, trying not to meet his friend's eyes. "I feel like an idiot," he muttered. His friend nodded silently, too embarrassed to respond. A woman who had filmed Nora expecting a joke slowly lowered her phone, cheeks growing warm with shame. She watched the video for a moment and then deleted it. Not because she didn't like the performance, but because she realized she had wanted to humiliate someone she didn't even know. The teenagers sat quietly, staring at the floor, their excitement replaced with an unfamiliar feeling: guilt. They weren't bad kids, just kids conditioned to laugh at anyone who didn't fit the world's polished expectations. Nora had done something powerful without meaning to. She reminded them that kindness matters. In a corner, an older woman wiped tears from her eyes. She wasn't crying because the song was sad. She was crying because the voice reminded her of someone she lost, someone who used to sing while cooking dinner, someone she wished she had listened to more carefully. Music has a way of opening wounds that people thought had healed. The pianist stood up from the bench, looking at Nora with genuine admiration. He had accompanied many singers, professionals, amateurs, students, but very few sang with the kind of authenticity that Nora did. He didn't clap. He didn't cheer, he simply nodded to her like one musician recognizing another. And then there was the famous singer. He didn't know how to react. His face, so confident earlier, now looked strangely hollow. His eyes didn't show anger or pride, they showed confusion. He had expected laughter, chaos, and mockery. He had planned a moment of dominance where he would control the stage and the story. But Nora had taken control accidentally, not by humiliating him, not by challenging him, but by showing real talent without trying. Everything he said earlier now sounded childish in his own memory. His joke wasn't funny anymore. His bravado wasn't impressive anymore. He wasn't the hero of the moment, Nora was, and that realization was humbling. Some people in the audience began to clap finally, not loudly, not wildly, but sincerely. Soft applause spread across the room, growing little by little, like a wave that didn't want to crash aggressively but wanted to move gently. Nora looked up when she heard the claps. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise replacing fear. She didn't expect applause, she had expected laughter. She thought she would embarrass herself, become a story people joked about for weeks. Instead, people were looking at her as if she had given them something valuable. The applause got louder, not because the audience wanted to be dramatic, but because they didn't know how else to show respect. They weren't cheering for a celebrity. They were cheering for someone who reminded them of something real. Some guests stood up slowly, awkwardly, not knowing if it was appropriate, but feeling that it was deserved. Nora didn't bow, she didn't smile broadly, she didn't raise her hands proudly. She just looked confused, moved, overwhelmed. She didn't see herself the way the audience did. She didn't understand that her voice meant something to them. And yet she had changed them. Because sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't happen in the singer, it happens in the audience. People who walked in with arrogance walked out with humility. People who laughed at weakness remembered their own weaknesses. People who believed talent only belonged to the glamorous realized how limited that belief was. One woman whispered to her friend, "I feel ashamed of how I judged her." A man answered quietly, "We all did." The famous singer still stood frozen, staring at Nora like she was a mirror reflecting all his insecurities. He clapped eventually, but his applause sounded small, stiff, embarrassed. He wasn't used to being humbled. He wasn't used to sharing the spotlight. And he definitely wasn't used to being overshadowed by someone with nothing but honesty. The pianist stepped off the stage and gently touched Nora's shoulder. "Take a bow," he whispered. "You earned it." She didn't know how, she didn't know the rules of performance. But she bowed a little, just enough to show gratitude without pretending confidence. The audience clapped one last time, softer, warmer, almost protective. Nora walked off the stage slowly, her legs shaky, her heart confused. She had not planned to perform, she had not imagined being admired, she had not expected to move strangers to silence or tears. But she did, without trying, without wanting fame, without expecting anything. She sang and something inside people changed. It wasn't loud transformation, it was gentle, but real. After Nora stepped off the stage, her body felt light and heavy at the same time. Her legs were shaking, but her heart felt strangely calm. She didn't fully understand what happened. She didn't plan for applause, attention, or admiration. She had simply shared something private, something personal, something she had always kept hidden. And now the whole room knew. The audience, still moved, didn't rush back into loud chatter or laughter. Instead, people slowly approached Nora, one by one, as if afraid they might scare her away if they moved too fast. For most of them, this wasn't just a performance. They had witnessed a moment that changed how they saw her, and maybe how they saw themselves. The first person to approach her was a woman in a dark green dress. She smiled gently and said, "Your voice is beautiful. I haven't heard something so honest in years." Nora's eyes widened slightly at the compliment. She didn't know what to say other than "thank you." It felt strange to hear praise after spending so much time being ignored or overlooked. A man with silver hair stepped forward next, introducing himself as someone who ran a local music school. His voice was warm and respectful, not pushy or bragging. "If you ever want lessons or a chance to perform, please come by," he said, handing her a small card. "You have something worth exploring." What? Nora stared at the card, feeling both overwhelmed and undeserving. Lessons? Performance? That world felt like a dream she wasn't allowed to have. She whispered, "I don't know if I can afford that." The man shook his head softly. "I didn't say anything about money. I said you were welcome." Those words felt like a gentle gift, unexpected, undeserved, and precious. Near the bar, a group of young musicians approached her with excitement in their eyes. They didn't act like fans or critics. They acted like people meeting someone they admired. "How long have you been singing?" one asked, almost breathless. Nora shrugged, embarrassed. "Since I was a child, but not for anyone just alone." What? One of the young women replied, "That explains it. Your voice has emotion, not technique. It comes from real life." Nora didn't know whether to feel complimented or exposed. She smiled nervously and tucked her hair behind her ear. People weren't congratulating her because she had hit perfect notes. They were recognizing something deeper: authenticity. Her voice wasn't polished, but it was human, heartfelt, and that made it unforgettable. Not everyone approached her with offers or business cards. Some simply gave her small smiles, nods, or quiet thank you as they passed. They didn't want anything from her. They just wanted her to know she mattered. But not everyone reacted with pure kindness. A few guests who had mocked her earlier now avoided looking at her. They didn't clap, didn't approach, didn't speak. Shame made them invisible. It was easier to pretend nothing happened than to face the truth that they had judged a good person unfairly. Meanwhile, the famous singer stayed at a distance, watching everything with a tight smile. He now stood on the outside of the moment he had accidentally created. People who normally surrounded him, wanting selfies and approval, now ignored him, absorbed in Nora's presence instead. He forced a laugh, trying to show he wasn't bothered. But his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't used to losing attention. He wasn't used to someone else being admired more than him, especially someone who never asked for it. His manager whispered, "This is not good for your image. You should go congratulate her." The famous singer hesitated. He didn't like being told to do something. But he also knew ignoring Nora would make him look jealous and insecure. So he walked towards her slowly, rehearsing a charming smile. When he reached her, he said in a loud, smooth voice, "You were incredible, truly." Nora looked at him with quiet eyes, unsure whether to believe him. His compliment felt different from others, more performative, less sincere. She thanked him anyway because kindness doesn't need to see intention. He continued, "We should collaborate sometime." What? The people nearby raised their eyebrows, surprised. His tone sounded like someone who wanted to regain power, to attach himself to her success. Nora nodded awkwardly, but she didn't answer. She didn't owe him anything, not praise, not partnership, not forgiveness. After he walked away, a soft voice behind her said, "Don't let him use you." She turned to see a young woman with honest eyes. People like him only support others when it benefits them. Nora nodded slowly. She wasn't naive, but she was gentle. She knew fame could be selfish. She had no desire to enter that world. As the night continued, people kept approaching her with genuine warmth. They asked her to sing again someday. They told her she changed their evening. They said she reminded them of the beauty of ordinary voices, ordinary people, ordinary courage. For the first time in a long time, Nora didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small. She didn't feel replaceable. She wasn't a waitress carrying drinks. She wasn't a quiet woman fading into the background. She wasn't a joke chosen for entertainment. She was someone people admired. She didn't seek attention, but attention found her. She didn't demand respect, but respect came naturally. She didn't perform for fame, but her talent made people remember her. Before leaving, the pianist approached her one last time. He didn't say anything grand. He just offered his hand and said, "If you ever want a place to sing, my door is always open." What? Nora shook his hand gently, "Thank you." As the crowd began to scatter, Nora stood alone for a moment, letting the emotions settle. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She didn't know if opportunities would last. She didn't know if she had the courage to pursue music. But she knew one thing: she was seen. And being seen, truly seen, changes everything. As the night came to an end, the once-loud room gradually emptied. Chairs scraped quietly, glasses clinked softly, and people walked toward the exit with gentler voices than they had arrived with. The atmosphere was no longer full of ego, noise, and competition. It was full of reflection, full of something tender. Nora stood near the side of the stage, clutching the business card the music school owner had given her, along with a few napkins where people had scribbled numbers or small messages. She stared at them with disbelief. She was used to carrying trays, not carrying possibilities. She could hardly believe that all of this happened because she sang a simple song. She She didn't know whether this night would change her life instantly or fade into a memory, but she knew it had already changed something inside her. She felt bigger than before, not louder, not proud, just more real. The famous singer walked past her again, offering a smile that looked polished, fake, and forced. He said, "You should really think about music professionally. People would love to hear you." Nora nodded politely, but she didn't engage. She could sense he wasn't offering help, he was offering control. And she didn't want her voice to belong to someone else again. Not like that. Not for ego, not for attention. She turned away, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid of turning her back on someone powerful. She felt strong. The waitress who worked with her all night came over, eyes soft and proud. "I had no idea you could sing like that," she whispered. Nora smiled shyly. "I didn't either, not really." The waitress laughed softly. "Well, now everyone knows. They'll be talking about you for days." Nora shrugged, still unsure how to feel. She didn't crave everyone's attention, only honesty and kindness. But a small part of her wondered what it would feel like to sing again, not for a crowd but for herself. People continued leaving, but not before stopping to look at her one last time, as if silently thanking her for something they couldn't describe. Some waved. A few mouthed words like "beautiful," "thank you," or simply nodded respectfully. None of them would have imagined doing that an hour ago. Nora didn't believe she had changed their lives. She didn't think she was a miracle or a hero. She simply sang. But sometimes one simple act of courage is enough to shift a room full of hearts. Outside, the crew started cleaning. Lights dimmed, instruments were packed, cables coiled. The pianist approached her carrying his sheet music. He didn't talk about fame or opportunity. He just asked, "Do you like singing?" What? Nora looked down at her hands and answered with complete honesty, "I like the feeling it gives me, like I can breathe easier." He nodded. "That's the best reason to sing. Don't let anyone take that from you." What? Those words sank into her deeply. She promised herself she wouldn't forget them. Soon everyone was gone except a few staff members. Nora changed out of her work uniform and stepped into the cool night air. The city lights flickered across the street and cars passed by, unaware of what happened behind those walls. Life outside continued unchanged, fast and indifferent, but Nora walked slower than usual. Not tired, not exhausted, but thoughtful. She considered the card in her hand, the invitations, the compliments, the recognition. She wondered if she should try, really try, to pursue something she had abandoned so long ago. Then came doubts. What if they were just being polite? What if tonight was a one-time thing? What if she wasn't actually good enough? These thoughts circled her mind, but another thought, smaller, softer, argued back. What if she was good enough? Not good enough to become famous, not good enough to be a star, but good enough to feel alive again. Her mother's voice returned, gentle and wise. "Don't be afraid of your voice. It belongs to you." Nora smiled, tears forming in her eyes. For so long, she had silenced herself because life demanded survival, not dreams. But tonight, for the first time, survival and dreams had existed together in one moment of music. When she reached the street corner, she saw a poster on a wall advertising an open mic night at a small cafe. She stared at it, heart pounding. She didn't feel confident enough to walk in. Not yet. But she didn't walk away from it either. She just paused, memorizing the date and location. Maybe someday, maybe soon, maybe when she was ready. But now she walked home with something she hadn't carried in years. Hope, soft, fragile, glowing like a candle in her chest. She didn't need fame. She didn't need applause. She didn't need people to tell her she was special. She only needed the courage to keep singing, even when life tried to silence her. Back inside the venue, people would soon forget the expensive decorations, flashy lights, and rehearsed performances. But they wouldn't forget the moment a simple woman with a quiet soul sang a song that made them feel something real. Nora didn't know it, but she had left a mark on everyone there. Her voice didn't just fill a room, it filled hearts. And long after the night was over, long after the applause faded, long after people returned to their busy, noisy lives, her song remained. Noisy lives. Her song remained.